and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achind. Afghanistan and its impact towards India is something which is being spoken about all over the place. There are multiple theories forming around, from the extreme of having the Taliban on our doorstep within months to the second factor which says that the Taliban will take some time, or would they even come? To discuss this entire thing, I thought we'll get two gentlemen together with immense experience and knowledge about this subject. To start with, Lieutenant General Dushyant Singh, PVSM, AVSM, who has attended the Regional Defense Counterterrorism Program with the United States, specializing in terrorist organizations and terror financing. Two major stints with the NSG as the DIG as well as the IG, and retired as the Commandant of the Army War College. And of course, Major General Sudhakar ji, who has vast experience in operations across a wide spectrum of conflict and terrain within India and abroad. He was also the Deputy Commandant of the Army War College. Thank you both for joining me today for this very interesting discussion and very relative discussion on what could be the impact of the Taliban coming into Afghanistan on our dear country. General Dushyant sir, I'll start with you. Sir, there's so much debated, there is so much of a talk about the groups which are there within the Taliban that are in charge. One of the biggest groups is the Haqqani network. They've got the maximum manpower within the cabinet, or the council as they call it. The founder, the Jalaluddin Haqqani, he's got an ideological based movement. He was supposed to be the main link between the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda back in the day. How do you think this whole thing plays out with him being, with this whole network holding such a strong position within the Taliban government, and of course their loyalty to groups like Al-Qaeda and of course ISIS?
Adi, first of all, thanks once again for calling me over for this talk. As far as the groups in Taliban are concerned, we have, to my mind, there are three prominent factions now emerging in Taliban. First is the Doha faction, as I call it, as more the liberal variety, led by Mullah Baradar. Second is the Yaqub factor, who was the son of the initial founder, Mullah Omar. And the third, of course, is what you mentioned, is the Haqqani faction, which is partly in control of most of the aspects of the governance, if you look at Taliban's interim council today. So there is a recognition that there is an internal friction going on between the three factions. As of now, mystery still surrounds as to whether Mullah Baradar is under captive, or he is of his own accord staying at Kandahar. One doesn't know, right? If he was staying at on his own accord, why shouldn't he have come to Kabul? When the Qatar delegation visited, he was not seen in Kabul. So therefore, there is something brewing here, and they can't be, smoke without a fire. So there was probably something which went between the three factions. So therefore, I see more of this struggle emerging in the future. I think we can ask Sudhakar to do what we were talking about.
Over to you.
Adi, thank you very much for inviting me to the Defense Talk. And I've gone through quite a few of your video clips. And kudos to you. Fantastic. It's simply superb and beyond parallel. And wish you many more. Coming straight back to the question about the Haqqanis that you inquired from General Dushyant, I'm too small a fry to comment anything which will make any value addition, but still I'll make a humble contribution. Well, ever since we spoke about the questionnaire which you had formulated initially, I myself have been making it in a very honest attempt to understand who are these Haqqanis, trying to find out their origin, how have they gone about fanning out, and a little bit detail about Jalaluddin, the founding father of the Haqqanis, who belonged to Afghanistan. It actually took me a long study of past a couple of days, took me to their academic career having been developed in a religious seminary in Pakistan, essentially where all the Haqqanis, in fact, Omar himself was a student of this seminary, and because of this Haqqani seminary, they have the origin and the title added to the names. This is one part. Essentially, this village or the seminary is very close to the border or nearer to the village, which often comes up. One is Patkai, if I'm spelling it correctly, Patki. The other one is also something similar, starting with P. It is in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province and very close to the border of Pakistan, Afghanistan. Now, having said about the origin of the Haqqanis, who are they? They are essentially nothing but they are Pashtuns. All of them I have found out, my research has indicated they are Pashtuns. But if we have to make a layman interpretation to derive some distinction and the meaning between the Taliban and the Haqqanis, Haqqanis are more brutal, more criminal, more lethal. The training is very hardcore. They have experienced, there's something like, if you talk in terms of civil society, all the armies in the world, they have normal infantry, normal army, and the special forces, commandos, para-commandos. They are those tougher guys. When Haqqanis are compared with any other terrorist outfits, they are the tougher guys who are given special missions and very mission-oriented tasking. Therefore, they have been kept under a tight leash by the ISI directly. They're directly under the ISI. ISI also controls Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed. These are the few additionalities which ISI is. Unfortunately, there is too many twists which is being actually coming out. Their linkages with, giving shelter to Tehrik Taliban having been approached by the Uyghur. Yes, these are more or less fully established. Now, Haqqanis, there is another part which is coming up. You have alluded, as also General Dushyant, in his very brief introductory remarks. You see, there is a great parallel between this time with the 90s. What happened in 90s is something, proportionately started manifesting now. Post de-induction or defeat of Russia and their withdrawal from Afghanistan started the emergence of Taliban. The Mujahids who were operating in Afghanistan and fighting against the Soviets, they were left with no job. And the genesis of Al-Qaeda in 1988, Al-Qaeda is nothing but an offshoot of the Mujahids. That is how they spread out and spread all over the world. And Al-Qaeda followed by the Taliban, followed by Taliban's invasion into Afghanistan in the year of 1996. And during the same period, from 1991 till end of the millennia in the year 2000, just take your mind to the J&K, Jammu and Kashmir, and what India as a nation state has been subjected to. We should be prepared for very tough times. Whether it happens or not, it's a different issue. I read a very huge article by some gentleman, IB specialist or very retired IB, who has given a forecast. Nothing is going to happen because nothing has happened in past 7 years. So somehow I don't agree with his theory, except for one train which was subjected to blast, Ujjain train passenger, 20 people died in 2017. So he has given a feedback to the people who matter in the higher up in the hierarchy. He doesn't foresee any kind of problem. I, as a person, I'm drawing parallels, and I tend to agree with what General Dushyant has said. I tend to agree with your discussion with General Shankar, the video clip which you had shared with me. We should be prepared for the worst eventualities. So much so that even the ISIS-K will start showing its footprints in a visible manner.
That's exactly what my thought was, as a matter of fact, with regards ISIS-K. But you brought out some very important points about Al Qaeda. Although Al Qaeda is supposed to be, not a very powerful organization today, but who knows? I mean, General Dushan sir, coming back to you, how do you foresee the focus of ISIS towards the Indian subcontinent, or the Indian, uh, territory, or the Indian territories as per se? Because we have issues within Bengal, we have issues within Kerala, we've had these black flags coming up in Kashmir as well. How do you foresee this thing going forward?
You see, as far as ISIS is concerned, ISIS is an international group. So it has an international focus. And for it to remain viable, it must find battlegrounds. Uh, Ideally, the ISIS Khorasan will get constrained for space if Taliban starts settling down and becoming more stable. Therefore, to my mind, other than providing safe sanctuaries, because that kicks into the Pashtunwali code of or Pakhtunwali code of Afghanistan Pashtuns, who believe that anybody who has taken shelter, irrespective of his past affiliations, will be honored till he stays on his property. So the shelter part would be taken care as far as, and they believe in it very strongly. Let me tell you. Therefore, this is a data point which we need to factor in before discussing ISIS. So therefore, ISIS will get the safe sanctuaries, whatever be the Doha agreement which happened, and in any case, the Doha guys are slowly getting marginalized. It is the Haqqanis who are coming into the center stage. ISIS focus has to be diverted, and the rightful place, the nearest place where they can actually interfere is either with the TTP against Pakistan, or better than that would be Kashmir. The foreign minister's statement today of the interim council of Afghanistan, Atiki, is revealing what the statement was a year back in May 2020, where they said that Kashmir is a bilateral matter between India and Pakistan. Today's statement, about 2 hours back, states that Taliban or the Afghanistan government would support any Muslims oppressed anywhere in the world. Now, this is an indirect avenue which they are trying to open up for dealing with the terror groups residing in their territory. So, to my mind, ISIS and the AQ will find their way into India. And in any case, they have already started working on this for the last 3-4 years. They have started using their information warfare machinery very subtly in India to establish their footprints and make inroads into the Indian subcontinent in general and India in particular. And to my mind, Kashmir would become their central focus. So, as far as ISIS, that's my view. I would like to briefly add on to understand what is happening in Afghanistan. For this, you must understand the human landscape of Afghanistan. There's something which will be of interest to our listeners also. See, Afghanistan comprises of 14 ethnicities, major ethnicities: Pashtuns, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Hazaras, etc. But it doesn't mean that all Pashtuns are together. Pashtuns comprise of 60 tribes. The major tribes are Duranis, Giljois, Yusufzais. Likewise, there are many others. And you would also realize that only 11 million stay in Afghanistan and 25 million stay in Pakistan. And hence, the moment of TTP, you must bear in mind how things may move in the future. Next is the tribes are further divided into clans, and the clans are divided into kinsmen. So, as they go deeper into power sharing, more and more of these internal feuds will keep occurring between the Pashtuns also.
Hmm.
So therefore, what is happening in Afghanistan needs to be given time to settle down, because there is no superior hand or hammer hand trying to control all of these people. They all consider themselves to be equal. They're all tribal lords, and when tribal lords are equal, they will fight.
I think that's a very, very strong bottom line that, we always see. The first mistake I guess a lot of people made was to consider Taliban as a monolith. That got busted. Now people are considering Pashtuns as a monolith. I think what you brought about would try and, demystify that entire thing, that there are various differences within them as well. And they don't follow a certain law, or a justice system wherein things will be equalized. The first thing that they would do is pick up an AK-47, and that's something is going to be interesting to watch. General Sudhakarji, I'd like to come to you, sir, with regards Kashmir, and General Dushyant also mentioned that the focus area would be Kashmir. There was a big rumor that floated around some time back, Panjshir for Kashmir and this and that. Although I find that to be a little, uh, you know, off track, because it's a little far fetched. It's good for the propaganda part of it, but it's a little, that whole deal seems a little off. A deal or no deal, sir, as we all understand, Kashmir will become the focus of the future in terms of terrorist activities, as it has been in the past as well. I'd like you to take the Kashmir issue a little forward, sir.
Well, we start in response to the question you have thrown, Adi. It's a very good question and most relevant to the Indian context, as also it has got international ramification. The start point to response would begin with abrogation of Article 370. Actually, people haven't understood what was Article 370, the temporary provision, and it was long awaited, long pending thing that should have taken place, modification that is taking place, and the affiliated Article 35 Alpha. When I was in the Middle East in recent past, those who know little bit, they somehow actually jumbled it up. And there is a requirement of information campaign by the government of India to explain the meaning of Article 370. J&K is an integral, indisputable part and parcel of India. The message should go out loud and clearly. And to my mind, there is no better method than the way it has happened. The present government is to be actually complimented. It should have happened 25 years back, or in the year 1994, when the parliament resolution was taken that POK is part and parcel, integral part and parcel of India, and come what may, we'll take it back, or whatever. Whether it happens on ground, it's a different issue. Second issue, I would like to say there have been issues of, the delimitation. Will not go into the political and the sociological part. I'll come into the military domain. Taliban is basically an inward force looking after, or supposed to look after, as a caretaker government or interim government of Afghanistan. Its job is not to look beyond the boundaries of Afghanistan. As of now you never know what is going to happen. This is an unstructured and understood aim of the Taliban, who is responsible as an interim government or the caretaker government. Whereas Al-Qaeda or ISIS-K, they have an international agenda. So coming straight down to the point, their area of influence or sphere of influence of expansion into the Indian subcontinent, and particularly J&K. As on today, our military domain experts will always discount that there are no Al-Qaeda footprint in J&K. General Dushyant himself is a super domain expert. His entire service has been there. I'm sure he will bear me out. We have footprints existing in J&K, even now, even after Article 370 has been executed. Now coming to ISIS-K. What is ISIS-K? There is a need for us to understand ISIS-K is basically, it formed out of the breakaway faction of the Taliban. The Taliban breakaway faction and the Tehrik Taliban. the breakaway faction, they had joined together, come and joined up with ISIS-K in the year 2015. Their agenda, as you have brought out in one of your, video programs, very beautifully, the area of responsibility is very vast. It's global. But within the global range, they have further limited to Central Asia, to Middle East, to including the Afghanistan, although Afghanistan is not part of Middle East, part of South Asia, and beyond South Asia. And now the ISIS-K openly has given a slogan that they will liberate J&K, but the underlying theme, which they perhaps have not stated it, articulated effectively, is what General Dushant has analyzed and brought it out nicely. One of the key agenda of ISIS-K is to ensure that the teachings or the rules of Islam on the face or on the land of earth is applied in a wholesome manner. Their agenda is not this South Asia or the Caliphate. Their agenda is the entire earth. So that way, actually, it encouraged me to go into more documents. When I started reading, I found there couldn't have been a better research document than what General Dushant himself had written in the article. And thankful to you, sir. And it has been an eye-opener to me. At least it has put me onto the right track to do more studies on the subject. That is all I can say in response to the question. As far as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, in coming times, the dangers are looming large. Modules have been busted in the UK. Day before yesterday, we had enough evidence. 8 months back, there was, I think, 8 or 9 modules in West Bengal. Couple of months back, couple of modules were busted in Kerala. We have had far too many ISIS people who have been apprehended or their linkage with ISIS has been established in Maldives, and modules also have been busted. Sri Lanka, we have enough of evidence, and so is Bangladesh. Take your mind towards Indonesia and Philippines and Malaysia. We have enough of evidence. So therefore, we have to tighten our belt and keep our eyes and ears open.
Interesting that you say that, sir. It's General Dushant, sir, you want to say something?
I wanted to add, basically talk about the Panjshir for Kashmir agreement, which you specifically asked about. On the face of it, because the ISI was deemed to have been involved in the capture of Panjshir, at least that is what was being proclaimed by a number of info warriors on the media networks. The next corollary to this would have been that this was part of the agreement that once we give you Panjshir, Kashmir should become the next focus of the Haqqanis and the Talibanis, right? But Talibanis have to rule the country, and if they have to rule the country, there could be an underhand deal which may be there between ISI and yet to be developed intelligence agency of Afghan Taliban. Once that happens, possibly the movement what we were talking about of focusing on Kashmir may take place, and therefore, despite the fact that that particular piece of information may not be true in entirety, but we need to take a lesson from that and keep ourselves ready for this kind of an eventuality.
Absolutely, sir. I think both of you brought out one very, very simple and important thing, that the Taliban is largely focused about controlling a certain area. The ISIS, which was in Syria, was trying to do that, but the ISIS that we are dealing with is not trying to control an area. It's trying to basically dominate the ideology of that particular area, and that's something very important that both of you have brought out very interestingly. General Dushant, I'd like to come to you, and this is something that you and I have been speaking about in, I think, 2 or 3 videos. We've spoken about this, the grey zone, the information warfare. Whatever said and done, that the Taliban itself has played the information card really well.
Absolutely.
Somebody's been helping them with that. My question is not that. My question is the factor that the information warfare today we see as, in my opinion, is more dangerous then an odd terrorist that could come inside Kashmir and create some trouble here and there, or throw a grenade or do an attack or something like that, because that attack has a very short term ramification. But this information systems that they are trying to use, it helps in the previous answer that you mentioned about dominating an ideology, as per se. So how do you see that opening as a threat to India, sir?
Adi, first of all, I think Taliban 2.0 should base 80% of its success on information war. The way they went about playing the information with their respective adversaries and also supporters, both. Taking a leaf out of that, what should be the Indian approach to it? To my view, if you focus on Kashmir, if you look at Kashmir, whenever we had the electronic media open, free for use, you found that the crowds built up very fast. The opposition to the security operations were taking place within minutes. The public was coming to the support of terrorists even before the security forces could reach a particular scene of action. I'm talking of the rest of the forces to back up the security forces involved in the engagement. The entire CRPF was actually dealing with maintaining the crowd to not to interfere into the main operations. How was this happening? This was all due to information warfare. What happened post Article 370 abrogation? Here, I would like to commend the planners. They didn't do the similar thing for the rest of the activities which they did, and for which the government actually has had to pay for. But in the case of Article 370, they went about preparing the battleground before abrogating the article. And moment the article was abrogated, you found that there was, although it may not pass the test of human rights, etc., but the entire internet was down. It was brought down. People who could tweak or who could tweet or who could go on the social media and actually mobilize crowds were disabled by putting them under house arrest. So therefore, there was an information blankness which was created post this Article 370. And what happened? Slowly, the public was made to understand that all this thing was happening in for the betterment of Kashmir. And even the people of Kashmir have started now looking at the entire process as positive. You're seeing images coming now out of Kashmir, despite the fact that there is an odd BJP MLA or a BJP politician who gets killed by the terrorists, not terrorists out there. But overall, the situation, the violence levels have come down. It is because of an effective information management. First, the denial, and then the projection.
Mm.
Both have to go hand in hand. If you only deny, then you will come into the eyes of the so-called human rights organization. The world will start getting at you. But if you do a right balance between denying to the people concerned, not to everybody, but to people concerned, the target people, that look, you can't play mischief with the country, and at the same time give the opportunity to your common public to vent their feelings. Slowly, as the things improve, the situation was opened up. I mean, the networks were opened. People started getting into their routine activities, and things became normal. Today, we are sitting on a dangerous heap of information warfare possibilities because of the information warfare which has been carried out by ISIS and Al Qaeda into India. And it won't take much time for the ISI. I in fact say that ISIS is the extension of ISI. So both hand in glove, LET, JEM, HUA, HUM, all these groups are waiting in the wings, and they're looking for an incident in India which they can flare it up in the information domain and then exploit it. Like I keep saying CA, a very, very a good, fodder for these guys to actually start their information warfare. NRC, again, with a similar intention. To the extent that these groups are also involving non-Muslim population by using the agitation such as farmers agitation also. We are playing into the hands of our adversaries who are not looking for so much of an ideology, but bringing down the country. ISI's aim is not really to propagate ideology. I'm very clear on that. It is to bring down India and India's image. And if we cannot give them a chance, we have to be proactive also at the same time. We should not lose an opportunity to play the offensive information warfare on our adversary. They should be put on the defensive. If they are on the defensive, if they are trying to mend their internal squabbles, I think you will be that much more stable. So, to my mind, information warfare is today 4 times important than conventional war, as per Gerasimov,
Indeed, sir.
the Russian and stuff.
Yes, sir. Indeed. General Sudhakarji, I'd like to actually take a bit of a follow-up with this, with regards to a ground incident that we see opening out in front of us. This whole question of this $88 billion worth of weapons, there are multiple stories about it. I've, as a matter of fact, done a video, understanding and trying to debunk the myth of the fact that the Taliban really has an air force today. When you actually dig into it, you realize that it's not something that has been projected on our TV screens and on our social media handles and so on and so forth. I'd like you to take the question forward of the umpteen amount of weaponry that has been left there, with regards the rifles, with regards the guns and so on and so forth. I mean, of course, for the terrorists to come into Kashmir or any of these areas in a sort of an SUV or Humvee is impossible. But the critical factor is the guns which are there. How do you see the actual ground reality of the weapons that have been left there versus the projection that it's enough an amount to make India, suffer through a bloody time? How do you see these two kind of things going together?
The compliments. You're asking a very relevant question, like a well-trained military leader, a very senior leader. So, a lot of relevance and meaning and implications. But please allow me to add one point about the question which you asked General Dushan. This is about the information warfare. I just want to make a value addition from his own article. The information warfare by our adversaries, all the terrorist organizations, particularly the ISIS, Al Qaeda, it's already full blown, it's in existence in the country, which Sir has so beautifully brought out. In fact, I was shocked and alarmed to see the magazines, the portals having, the nomenclatures having undergone change. There is a gradual, calibrated, and incremental way how they are capturing the cerebral space of Indian Muslims. Now, next point that brings me to is, sir, in the last census, I had thought of not talking about it's a sensitive issue, but since it is limited to a restrictive kind of audience, as on today, we have 200 total Muslim population in our country are 200 million. Out of 200, in 2011, it was 177 million or 175 million. Out of 200 million, 50 million are Shias and 150 million are Sunnis. What is ISIS? What are the Talibans? Do I have to overstate the thing to indicate the linkage? And given the fact what I stated in the previous question, that the basic motto and agenda of ISIS-K or Al-Qaeda is to ensure that the writ or the rule of Allah is practiced on the face of the earth, not in a caliphate. That is that part. Now coming to the question of, you're saying 88, but somebody has sent me a copy of the Senator Brigadier L.C. Patnaik from Marathalai only. So he gave a beautiful talk on Afghanistan a few days back in a big gathering of webinar. So I borrowed the data from there. The senator in their discussion, he has said $85 billion worth of arms, weapons, equipments have been left over in 300 million pieces. Okay. Followed by a very close friend of mine, he sends me an article from Washington Post, which says, has the strategic deception unfolded? For a moment, I couldn't understand. But after having gone deeper into the article, then what came out was something which scares me. But the strategic deception has been played by none other than the US and the NATO forces. No matter, we'll segregate the issue of Donald Trump having negotiated with Taliban without consulting the NATO, without consulting the sitting government. That's a different issue. But the fact of the matter is that all these pieces, 75,000, Humvees, 211 aircrafts, out of 211, most of us may not be knowing. Yesterday only it has been confirmed that 44 aircrafts are unusable. Some of the aircrafts are there in Uzbekistan, some in Tajikistan, some are there here. But suffice to say that there are no adequate spare material. The spare parts are not available. Same, large number of grenades, grenade launchers, mortar bombs, shells have been left, but the fuses are missing. So much so, let's say, if the entire lot left is X, then 60% of the X has been found to be unusable. So this is one part I thought I should give as a preamble to the answer to your question. Now coming on to the usability of the remaining part against us, is there a threat or potential of its application against India? I would say even if it is not there, we as military people, we should be mentally prepared for it. It happened between 91 to 2000. It will happen again from 2021 to 2022, 23, 24. Even if these weapon systems do not come into our, let's say, J&K or into our country, China is only waiting to pump in money and material in significant manner. To my mind, China will be the last person to put its boots on ground in Afghanistan, never. So anyway, coming back to the point that you were saying, even if this balance 40% of the usable weapon systems available in Afghanistan trail towards India, are we prepared? So when I answer this question, it has to be preparation in terms of what? Intelligence. As in today, we don't have hardly any handful of number of Indians in ones and twos. We don't have anyone in Afghanistan to give us the basic human intelligence. Number two, intelligence in terms of the groups. Why have they very, in a celebratory mode, they started announcing that the Durand line has now shifted to the western borders of Afghanistan, along Iran and Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. That is because they want to take advantage of the geography, shift all the terrorist camps into Afghanistan, thereby deny the ability of India to carry out any surgical strike in future. Retain the ability for them to strike and ensure deniability and pull back to Afghanistan. Third, so there is a requirement to carry out an intelligence spectrum of the surveillance in such a manner. The ISR capability should be such that we not only have human intelligence, the raw has to get activated. If not within Afghanistan, then outside Afghanistan, in the periphery of Afghanistan. We need to establish a contact. There are Tajikis, there are Hazaras. Hazaras are also our friends. We have Uzbekis there. We also have a lot of people amongst the Pashtun. Why can't Pashtun be taken advantage of? Most of us would get surprised that India is the only nation which has got largest number of Pashtun. 32 lakh Pashtuns are living in India for past several years. 32 lakhs is not a small number. If you are harboring or sheltering such a huge population of Pashtun, why not we build up and create an intelligent network out of these people and penetrate into the system of Pashtuns, Taliban, try and break them. Third thing, as the camps are shifting, if you visualize some kind of thread, if they start shifting from, say, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa area towards, let's say, Peshawar, they have to cross the river Indus. then come on to this side. Pashtun belt crosses and comes to the east bank of Indus River. There's a huge stretch of almost about 85 kilometers north-south and 35 kilometers east-west. Pakistan is scared that this Pashtun belt, if they start actually turning this side towards Pakistan, they will cross Indus and start claiming this piece of land also. Then there is hardly death left to the Indians. This is where the Imran Khan is crying. Multiple agencies, they're keeping their eyes and ears open. There is a need to keep our eyes and ears open. To my mind, people have started moving. So these are the kinds of things. It may not happen for all you know with so much of intensity and magnitude, but we need to be extra careful. Keep our security apparatus absolutely tickety-boo, ready to take them on right from the word go. And finally, these weapon systems, they will come sooner or later. They will be used against us. Today, out of 200 terrorists operating inside J&K, almost about 60 of them who are foreign terrorists. The number of foreign terrorists, comparatively, it cannot be compared with 90s, definitely in the present terms, is slightly higher in percentage than that of local terrorists. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Interesting, sir. Please, sir. General Dushyant, you had something to say, sir.
Quick comments so that things are put in the perspective. As far as the 85 billion is concerned, rightly brought out, 60-40, I mean, numbers can vary here and there, but of concern would be the AKs, as far as we are concerned. Where could they go? As I had said, that there is going to be an internal rivalry. And so therefore, there are only 2-3 options available. One, for internal squabbles, good situation for India. 2, diversions towards India. Fine. If they get diverted, we need to have our intelligence in place. How do we do it? 4 million refugees in Iran. Iran is crying for help. Help the Iranians. Deal with the refugees. Build your networks from the northern side. 3, unusable weaponry, especially the explosive content. Remember, terrorists have a very, very sound mind. They just need explosives. They don't need high-tech equipment. They will take the explosives out, convert them into IEDs, and bring them on to you or to themselves or to the whichever faction they are fighting. So kindly be conscious of that aspect also. B, unusable high-value equipment. Be rest assured, Pak, Turkey, Qatar are going to chip in for training and skills. So we have to somehow keep a watch on that also. So we should not be totally carried away by one argument. Be conscious of all these small little things which can happen. And finally, good thing about us is that no Afghan government in the last 70 years of its existence has ever agreed to Durand Line. Haqqani, Taliban, no Taliban, even the Ghani government, even the Karzai government, everybody will not agree to Durand Line. It will be one single swath. And if it is one single swath, the depth reduces for Pakistan, not for us.
Yes.
Interesting.
The TTP, Baluchis, Sindhus, if you combine this entire movement which is taking place along the western frontier, we have a situation going in our favor. Provided we have kept those our eyes and ears, which possibly we tried to deploy them a few years back. Even the Americans actually opposed us when we deployed those 10 consulates around in Afghanistan.
Yes.
The Americans actually opposed us, but we went about it. So it's not that we listen to everything, what the US says. We have a strategic autonomy in place, and I think we are doing well to keep the situation under control. The foreign minister, to my mind, is articulating things well. These are my quick comments so that things are put into complete perspective.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead.
So, Dushant, just going to continue with you. General Sudhakarji mentioned about the JEM and the LET, and you mentioned about the HUM some time back. We all know that they've got about 6-8 thousand of these fighters fighting in Afghanistan. For the purpose of the Taliban. There are two small things that come into mind when somebody takes that into perspective. One, would they be able to disengage from the Afghan region and basically come into their own original purpose? Two, as General Sudhakarji also mentioned that they would try and relocate their training camps into Afghanistan to give them a little more deniability of uh, the hand of Pakistan within this. Looking at that, sir, how do you think the escalatory ladder should be handled by India? Because in case there is an attack, will it be viable for us to actually raise up into across that side?
Well, two, three things quickly. One, if you have a training camp in hypothetically in Afghanistan, and then they are meant to be applied against us to whichever places we are talking about, Kashmir, etc. They have to travel through Pakistan. Point number one. How are they traveling through Pakistan? As far as India is concerned, we give a damn. If your territory is being used for making somebody travel from across your country and then striking us, as far as we are concerned, Pakistan has struck us. So the escalatory ladder,
Remains.
I don't think will have any change, right? Yes, what may change is to find the targets in our reach so that we can attack them with the impunity with which we can do now. Logically speaking, training camps deep in a particular country's territory can only be for a permanent base. The temporary bases would have to again get back into POK for their final preparation, launch, etc.
Launch pads.
So we would have not one big target, but probably we would have multiple such targets, which we can go and hit them as per our convenience and as per our articulations. I think we will have the escalatory ladder well within our control. We do not have to bother too much about the nuclear card. We have crossed that red line as far as Pakistan and India are concerned. If it is a terror attack, we should not bother much about the escalatory ladder as such. Pakistan is not in a position today to take a full-fledged war with India, out of question, unless the Chinese join hands and prod it to do a war, but it will be at the peril of Pakistan. This is my view, I think.
So, what about the JEM and the LET? Will they be able to shift their focus?
JEM, LET, yes, they would be able to shift focus, and I've always maintained earlier that provided the Talibani situation is stable, I do not see this happening for the next 1 or 2 years at least, till the time the internal squabbles are
sorted out,
set aside. The bonhomie of a stable government is being projected today. Anas Haqqani has to come on the air. Who is Anas Haqqani? He's not there in the government also. But he comes out and says everything is fine between Mullah Baradar and about 2 or 3 hours back, he's given a statement. When somebody has forced to give a statement of this nature, it means either the information warfare of the other side is taking a good toll of the current government. B, there is some problem there. I tend to go with the second one, that there is some problem there. And the problem is only kept under the lid till the recognition. He said, the foreign minister said that we are likely to get recognition by Germany. They're expecting the floodgates of recognition to open. Moment Germany gives the recognition to, there are 4 consulates which are already there in Afghanistan. If the Germans give recognition, which may appear to be, this is the news story, then the true colors will start coming out of internal fights. So it's too early to actually say that they will be able to divert. I think they will have some time to spend in trickles, payrolls. As I said, terrorists are out of control of, they're not under control of everybody in a 100% manner. So you would still find people taking leave, running away, and trying to join hands in Kashmir. The Kashmiris who may have been diverted towards this area might go. By Kashmiris, I mean the Pakistan occupied Kashmiri guys might go back to their. But the foreign fighters, I have my doubt. First, they will join the ISIS and AQ. The LET, JEM, as of now, are involved in the resistance also. When Pakistan supposedly helped Panjshir being captured, do you think all of them would have been Pakistan? No. It would have been the ISI mercenaries who are going along with them, and these are the guys who would have gone and suffered. So therefore, there is some time. I think Saleh is still not declared dead, and Masood is still not declared dead. And Khanpuris of Hazara is also waiting in the wings. They just killed 16 people 2 days back. So things are going to hot up. Let's wait and watch.
Interesting. I think that's the main theme. We should wait and see what's happening. Yes, sir, please.
Some value additions as far as the information warfare. The classic example we keep a successful implementation of a successful information warfare was by the Hezbollahs way back in 2006, where they brought the Israeli army on the knees in a 36 days war. They started with a radio station. Radio station. In 2 years' time, it became a TV station. Sorry, the power of the radio station increased. Number of audience or the clientele also expanded. And soon it became a TV station, a local TV station. And from local, it became an international TV station. And there was to be only one admin administering multiple social networks sitting in London. So, because of paucity of time, I'll not go deeper into it. Those kind of technology, because now what has happened between 1991 to 2001, there is a fourth industrial revolution which has actually jumped. And fourth industrial revolution is nothing but about the electronics, about the IT, online revolution. This somehow in the military paradigm, we are yet to experience in our day-to-day warfare. Whether it is happening or not, sir has been General Dushyant. He's been through the thick and thin of Northern Command, and I also have been there. When you go onto the brass tacks on the ground, you find I have been in high altitude. Leave alone the IT, there is no electricity, there is no optical fiber. So there is a contradiction. We will require time, but having said that, the dangers are not so imminent as people may make out to be. Afghanistan, it is this interim government, you never know. It may blow up on the face of the interim government. It may not stand the scrutiny of its own people. It's already cracking up. Okay, so there is already a demand coming for the elections from the Iran. The people within are saying, yes, if the governance is to be ensured, then our own people have to be there, of the people, by the people, and for the people. Emirate or republic, that apart, governance is governance. They have no money. The biggest criticality in Afghanistan today is food, water, and clothing and shelter. Okay, and in one of the media channels, somebody asked a Pakistani about the refugees. Yes, we acknowledge that Pakistan is one of the countries which is actually looking after, I've done research on this, actually looking after large number of refugees. Now, looking after the refugees doesn't mean they're paying from their pocket, they're getting international aid. It is towards their side. There are also occasions wherein they have turned them down, that send them back to these people.
Yesterday itself.
So,
yes, sir.
Okay. Iran has got about 1 million. Pakistan has got about 4 million. That is, as per UNHCR, it's around 2.6 plus 1.4 plus this side, that side, roughly, which are unaccounted for, unregistered, comes to around 4 million. And there are yet more number of people who are pouring in, who are not allowed to come because the fencing has been erected. Earlier, there used to be 235 passes or the checkpoints. When the border was open, now the fencing has been established. They have been reduced to only 16 checkposts. Out of 16, there are only 6 which are being manned. So there's a huge kind of a humanitarian problem which is building up. So I thought I'll just make quick references. One point with regard to the money which US has spent, because there is a bigger game plan which doesn't catch the eyes and ears or the attention of people or layman. Because we understand what is given in black and white or hear or read here and there. The big plan, if $2.26 trillion have been spent by US in Afghanistan alone, out of which $1.56 trillion have been spent on the defense expenditure, so where is the money? Where is the money gone? When the question like this are coming, in past 20 years, 900,000 people have died, including their soldiers, civilians, contractors, etc., etc. in 20 years. Where? Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Libya to an extent. Okay. So out of this, where is the money gone? It has been found by Brown University in the study that the whole money, there is a cycle. There is a cycle which is actually revolving in such kind of deployments outside, expeditionary deployment of US forces. They have come to a conclusion that all the money is circulating within the defense industry. To keep the defense industry going, they have a concept of discard policy. Every weapon, equipment, or machine or vehicle which is produced, it has got, General Dushan has been in US, he will throw some light on it. My son also keeps telling me something on these lines. Their utility value is for 2 years. After 2 years, they discard it or sell it off to a second-hand guy, a second person as a second-hand product. So as to keep the defense industry going. That's it, Adi, you can take off.
I think that's a very interesting point that it kind of also gives another angle to why the US left so much equipment back in Afghanistan. A lot of people have brought out very different opinions with regards to the fact that some people have actually said that there was a deal signed about this also, that the US would leave everything there. I mean, I find it a little far-fetched, but anyways. So I think this has been a brilliant discussion. We've gone through the entire context of starting from the Al-Qaeda to the IS. I mean, it's sometimes slip of tongue. I mention ISI, but I need to add another S into the ISIS. But one and the same thing, if I may, add into that particular comment. We've gone through these entire organizations. We've seen what their focus is. We've seen what they want to do in terms of, either they want to land hold or they want to have the ideology, as was brought out very beautifully by both the generals sitting on this webcast. It's very important for India to understand the kind of threats that are coming in from there, and the way that those threats will actually start looking at us. And it should not be just the fact that we are focused just Kashmir. Of course, Kashmir is a big thing, but we also have volcanoes which are in the south and in the east as well, which we need to look after, because there was another report that said that a lot of these guys may not be coming into India with the direct route of Kashmir. They'll be taking another alternative route to Bangladesh, to Myanmar, to Nepal, and so on and so forth. So it's something that we will have to, as both the generals again brought out, the powder needs to be dry. India needs to be ready. And finally, that I would like to say is that the information campaign, we must learn from the Taliban as to what they've done, because it may be not politically right for me to say that, but whenever somebody does something well, we must take a lesson. India must come up with its own campaign and its own style to negate this entire nonsense, if I may use the word, coming up from that particular region. I'd like to thank both the generals for joining me today for this very, very important discussion. And of course, I will try and get them back together for another discussion, another day, another subject. Till then, sir, Jai Hind.
Yeah, thank you.